started moving, so we're just going to go right into it. So I wanted to start by asking all three of you, when you first saw this Art for Advancing Civic Participation, what came to your mind? Someone asked me, is there a place for, does that even make sense? Can art, can all of what we've been engaging with, fiction, non-fiction, all of that, music, can this, do they have a place when we're talking about civic participation and good governance conversations? I'll start from you.
Yeah, hi, thank you, good evening. Well, when I actually found it fascinating and interesting because I think civic participation is an art in itself. So if you think around, if I reflect on the ways I've engaged the civic space, so be it protests, like you can't have a street march without good music because you need music to keep you going, you need to ginger each other so you have a chant. You have things you say to remind yourselves on why you are part of that movement or part of the struggle. So if I think around it, I feel like they are so interconnected because what is art? Art is an expression that could be interpreted in different forms, but at the core of art is expression. And participation is expression, right? It's about engaging, it's about expressing how you want to be led or who you want to lead you. It's about expressing how you want people to account. And for me, because I also am a lover of art, and sometimes I scribble, let me not say right, because they are like great minds here. But each time I think around participation, I see the art in it, and I wish a lot more people would be a bit more engaged in that, because the reason I started the work I do or started engaging in the space, I was inspired by speeches like persons like Martin Luther King when he says, I have a dream. I find that speech so poetic. And each time I listen to it, I feel really energized. Or I'm a lover of Fela music, and each time I listen to his song, I'm more energized to do what I want to do. And I read a lot of poetry, you know. I remember in school, I think it was Larry Peters, who have come home from the bloodless war, you know. I think of certain kinds of art, and I see that my journey has been informed by that. So for me, art and participation is art, and a lot more people need to appreciate it from that perspective, because the reason we exist as humans is to be seen, to be heard, is to express ourselves, which is why when you give birth to a baby and the baby does not cry, you see they pat the baby to cry, because that is the best form of expressing that you're human, that when we hear that cry, is that sound of I'm alive, I'm free, that's why I'm human. So when the baby doesn't cry, you wonder why is he or she not crying. So it just shows that from birth, we're created to express ourselves from birth. And if from birth we're created to express ourselves, then we must always identify opportunities to express ourselves and ensure that we're seen, we're heard, and we're represented at every point. So for me, they are really interconnected.
Thank you. Ode?
Thank you very much, Doyin, and thanks to the organizers for having me and the opportunity to meet Nnamdi as well. I've worked with Doyin and Cynthia over the years, but for me, one of the good things about the interrelation between this is I'm a fan of good music. I love music a lot, and looking at the way we see civic participation has been around, we are a culture. I see myself as culture. When we say Nigeria we are cultural people, like we are the culture ourselves, and we want to use traditional means in engaging people. But when you engage people, you have to also find out that we don't want to use the Western way of engaging people, right? So for that music part, for me, looks like, where do you find people who are not normally included in conversations that affect them? So if you look back to what has happened to Nigeria, we had the Japa conversation this morning. Sometimes when you get into the space, it's not easily relatable. Like, you can't explain that in English. I can't speak English with Cynthia, this is what is happening, but she probably might understand what I'm talking about. But some people, you have to find creative ways and exciting ways to pass this message. I'll talk about the program we run in a couple of minutes, but in that space, we find out that once you want to talk to creative or artists, or have conversations like we have about civic participation, sometimes they are not even sitting in the room with you for an hour or 30 minutes. They just want to get what they want in their head creatively and move on. So how do we begin to engage? So that's why I mentioned earlier on, we are a culture and we have to communicate to people in that kind of way in which they can relatably understand what you are saying to them. For me, that's what I think at the moment. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Namdi.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. So the way I see it, creative endeavor kind of documents like the social, like the reality, social issues, the reality of the people, the pulse of the nation. So she was talking about protests, and earlier when they were talking about the Japa thing, the whole NSAS came up, and this is just an example. So a lot of people, it was happening in Lagos, the Lekki Bridge thing, right? And a lot of people outside Lagos doubted it. But then when Burna Boy dropped the song and he talked about it, that, in a way, for people that doubted it, like, oh, this thing really happens, So I think, like, art is a way to validate and document, like, the social issues as they go on. And there's something with music, that music is very immediate. So if it's a novel, of course, you have to write, you go to an editor, If it's a film, of course, it takes a while to make. But music, these guys can go into a studio, like, in an hour and make a song about something that happened, like, today. Yeah, and it's out there, and that validates it, that documents it, right?
Thank you. And I think I'm going to follow up with you on that point. And I just want to talk about public debates as central to participation and democracy. Within a democracy, it is important that we have spaces, and that the spaces that exist are healthy and respective of the different voices that exist. As a creative writer, an artist in your own right, what do you consider? How do you see the landscape of public debate in Nigeria and in Africa, if you want? And in thinking about it, or in your appreciation of what public debate looks like, do you see a role for yourself, in helping to improve it, or in helping to contribute to improving that space?
Okay. So public debates in Nigeria, I feel like Nigeria, Africa generally, I feel like it's become something that, with like social media and stuff, it's something that is like at the pulse every day. You get into a bus, it's public debates. Every second, it's your reality. You're coming down to the festival, you're talking to someone and all that. But for the artist, I feel you just have to realize that, apart from the fact that you have works and you have your own agenda and stuff that you're trying to push out, you're also a voice, right? And if you're a voice, then you have to say something. So, like, I was, yesterday, I learned about somebody, William Onyabo, great musician. As far as like electronic music is concerned, he's like the godfather, right? But then his music was very good music. I'm not taking anything away from his artistry, okay? I'm not taking anything away from his artistry, but he's at the same level with Fela. But more people know Fela because of what Fela's music also, or because of the content, not just the artistry. So I think that's like what the creatives should realize, that, okay, yes, I can write, like Mr. Angeye was making very interesting jokes about his work, but you have to know that, okay, I'm also a voice, right? So I can do this, but I also have to represent this reality, right? So I think that's the writer's duty.
What is the writer's duty? I was going to ask you, because you referenced Fela, and I think when she mentioned Fela, there was a picture, a mental picture that I think everyone sort of got. So when you think about yourself and the work that you do and your colleagues who are here, and you think about the larger society and all of what you described is going on there, say in the social media space, digital platforms, and in the world as a whole, do you see yourself being responsible for what is out there? And does that reflect, do you think that should reflect, or does that already reflect in the way that you put pen to paper, as it were?
Well, whether you like it or not, it's going to reflect, right? Because your stories are set in the real world. And even if your stories do not necessarily want to address those issues, like your character may want to go somewhere and there's no fuel. You get? So that it's already there, right, in the work. So I feel like as far as your work stays true to the realities, I'm not saying focus on, like, because we have different genres, right? So you can do magic realism, you can do whatever. But as far as it stays true to representing the pulse of society, social issues are always going to be evident.
Awesome, thank you. I'm just going to go to Cynthia. So gradually moving into civic participation and voice, there are barriers to people using their voice and being able to participate actively in critical spaces. And some of these are historical barriers, things that we met, as it were, structures that we grew up to have to contend with. And you've done a lot of work to increase youth and women's participation in different spaces. Can you tell us more about these barriers and your motivation, to tackle them, and also what lessons you have, that you can share on what worked and what's not?
Well, so maybe a bit of how we started. So Yaga Africa started as a student association in 2007 in the University of Jos. And someone talked earlier around how Jos has lots of talent. Then we were students, and I think at the time there was a lot going on within the university system, and the government wasn't listening, basically. And we felt that youth voices were not represented in decision-making processes, and no one was interacting or engaging young people to ask them, what are your challenges? What is your problem? How can we fix that? And one of the things we had identified at the time was, because young people are not in government, the older ones who are in government do not understand our realities, so they can't even make policies to meet our needs. And for us, the thesis was, if we get younger people into office, and perhaps we can begin to influence the quality of policies that would come out from government and ensure better representation for youth. And so that was how we started as an organization, and then we used to have this slogan, when we speak, the government would shake. Because for us, we're going to build a movement of young people demanding accountability and getting involved in politics, which was what informed the Not Too Young to Run movement, which took a long years from 2009. Subsequently, we were able to achieve the amendment of the Constitution in 2018. And the idea for Not Too Young to Run was, where young people, Nigeria has a youth population of about 60%, a median age of 18. But when you think around governance and those in government, you don't see youths or young people in government. And we needed to get younger people in government, but the law was a barrier. The Constitution provided for age to contest for specific offices. And so by the law already, it closed out the space for young people. To run for president at the time, you needed to be 40 years. To run for a state assembly, you needed to be 30. For House of Reps, 30 years. Senate and the House of, and the governorship, 35. So we have started this push to amend the Constitution to remove the age criteria or reduce it. And we didn't get all the demand, because to amend the Constitution is very difficult. But it took long years of movement, but we finally got the amendment of the Constitution in 2018, and it reduced the age to 25. So for us, one issue was reduce the age, open up the space. If we have younger people, if you have a higher percentage of young people running, it's a likelihood that there will be more young people winning elections. So that was one barrier we had seen, the legal limitation. The other part when it comes to participation is governance or politics has been seen as a dirty game. So young people do not see the incentives to participate. So I engage or I vote, but my votes do not count. So why should I come out to vote? Because the system is already rigged. You have quality candidates who contest, but they don't have the access to get in because they are not willing to play dirty. And so you see, for young people, for a lot of younger Nigerians, when they look at the process, they just think this is not for me because the system in itself is rigged against us. So there is that challenge within the political process, which keeps young people away. And the other part is the money, because now politics is so expensive that it's now a game for the money bags. And most of these money bags are people who own stolen money, basically. It's not from their hard-earned wealth, right? So you have people who have stolen from us, and they've impoverished the people, but they continue to perpetuate themselves in office. So it's a vicious circle. So for people, young people who have aspiration, who have the capacity, they don't have the kinds of money to compete with these thieves. And so because you can't compete with the thieves, you feel really hopeless, sort of. And so one of the things we're hoping to achieve, because these are some of the barriers, and I always want to look at the opportunities, and which is one of part of what a lot of groups are doing with Young Africa and Not Too Young to Run, is can we begin to change the status when it comes to contesting for office, so identify the opportunities to engage, one, as voters. Young people have the numbers, and election is a game of numbers. So this election, I'm happy to see all the movements online. I'm glad to see younger people talking about issues on social media platforms, and I'm hoping that translates to real power when it comes to voting. Because at the end, if we have the numbers, we are the highest percentage when it comes to registered voters, but we don't come out to vote. What we'll do is we'll keep letting these money bags who have stolen from us believe that their money is all they need to remain in office and not the votes of the people. So for us, and for a lot of young people, I think what we have to do is this engagement, this enlightenment, this anger from the NSAS protest. We need to translate that to power, because you need the numerical strength to contest and compete with this existing power status quo to challenge the system to influence the outcome of the elections. So getting younger people who are registered to vote to come out and vote, I think for me that's one way to start breaking the barriers, because that way we can choose people who understand our issues and can represent us better. The other part is youth candidacy. With the Not Too Young to Run, we have younger people running for office, and the next elections, we have over 1,000 youth candidates who are under 30-year-olds. So people who are 25 to 29, we have 1,400 plus running for different offices. So these are people who are really young. Some of them may not have the resources to compete, but if young people come out to vote for them, they have a better chance to win. So we have an opportunity to vote in younger candidates, because now we have younger people contesting for office. So that is one way to also break the barrier. And I think the third part is how we mobilize and organize differently. I believe that young people have the vibrancy, the creativity, and innovation to organize differently against the existing way politics is run. And why do I put that out? NSAS, we had, within 2 weeks, we had young people who were out on the streets. Funds were raised. No, there was no grant, there was no donor. But monies were raised. We had people providing legal services to young people that were detained. And a lot of things was happening. It was just youth organizing. So if there's anything we learned from NSAS, is that we can organize differently. We can actually start to raise funds to support people we care about to run for office. We can use the arts to promote individuals. Like, there are lots of talents who are influencers, who are young people. Imagine if we leverage those spaces that they influence to inspire voters to vote for the candidates we've chosen. I think those are like the barriers that exist, but opportunities for us to break through, because honestly, politics understands number, and power will not be given to us. We need to literally take it. And the only way we can take it is by showing up, is by being a bit more active, and is by asserting our strength through the votes. And I think the next election would determine if truly all these are passion and anger, if really it would yield any result, because I'm looking forward to the next elections, and it ought to be the elections of the youth. Already, the new registered voters shows that youth registered voters are above 70%. In 2019, youth registration was 51.1%, but youth turnout was 28%. In Lagos, youth turnout was 4.9% for the president. So you can imagine that over 40 youth registered in Lagos to vote. 40% of the registered voters in Lagos were young people, over 40, but only 4.8 turned out to vote. So you can imagine if the numbers that registers turns out to vote, we determine the outcome. And I think that, for me, is where we can assert our power, and that is how we can break the barriers that already exist.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to sort of segue into the different approaches, Ode, that you and your team have been using in mobilizing young persons. I know that one thing that drew my attention to you the first time I engaged with Accountability Lab was that you had an entire project that centered around music. And I was like, music for corruption, for talking about corruption and anti-corruption. Why music, Ode? And are there other approaches that have worked in your efforts to advance social causes, including gender equality, mainstreaming youth participation, and all of that?
Thank you very much, Tony. I was just smiling to myself. You said, why music? One of the artists says, if you ask me, now who I go ask? But however, on a lighter note, just to say that like I mentioned earlier on, one key thing for myself and my organization as well is how do we speak the English we speak to people, to young people. Young people are not drawn to our everyday English. That's one of the key things we found, and one of the things we thought about music was that engagement. Beyond the audience they have a voice, which when they put it out there, it reaches millions. So while growing up for me, I have a military background. I mentioned that to a couple of people, and while growing up, it's quite interesting. I was just sitting here thinking about listening to Fela while growing up. I think they've mentioned this as well. It was about the issues which we still have till now. And I keep asking myself that question, and which I will also ask. It's a combination of somebody getting into the studio, cooking up the beats, another person writing the lyrics. So what would you think of both? So that question keeps striking me of what music is, basically. So when an artist or a young music artist gets into the studio, starts thinking of how do I communicate? We all have issues which we are facing with Nigeria. Take, for instance, Nigeria is faced with corruption issues, lack of participation for young people, lack of representation, inequality issues. We don't even have our voices heard out there. So once decision-making processes are out there, the government just lays it on the table. But people keep their grievances back at home. Otherwise, like we talked about this morning, the next thing is, what is the quickest exit for me to get out of this country? So we just find young people in that space to say, come and talk about your grievances. But when we had a training back in Lagos in 2019, when we started this, so we had replicated this program from our sister organization in Liberia, who had done Rap to Rep. So it's basically Rap to Represent. When we came here and had a couple of meetings with a couple of music organizations, the conversation went beyond that group of people who sing based on rap. But would you want to limit that to just people that do rap? But we now expanded that to see how people can use their voices. Basically, whatever genre of music that you do, from R&B to hip hop to Afro, to whatever, we felt like it was an opportunity for you to come and inform. First of all, we want you to inform your audience, and secondly, to inspire change in the society. If you wake up every morning, there's a music at some point playing from anywhere from the radio or the TV, which we feel was good information for people. So if you look back at what had happened from a couple of artists, I think it was after NSAS or before NSAS, Falz had did a song, Talk, Nami Talk, or No Be Me Talk. Then we had back in the days where Timaya did Dem Mama, because of issues which had happened back in the Niger Delta region. Then you move on to the recent time with what Burna Boy has done, and we looked at all of these things basically to see how we can actually empower the younger generation, which Cynthia has mentioned, on the population in the society. The A-list artists, please forgive me, don't tell anybody there's a big artist. It's big business. We don't rule that out. So once we approach them, there's always that business angle. But now what we have found with the NSAS and every other engagement that has happened in recent times is it will eventually come to your doorstep. I believe the inflation has affected all of us, which is a global problem. I feel corruption has affected all of us. Every other issue, from lack of participation to representation, has affected all of us. But how do we get to build that conversation and ensure that our voices are laid on the table? And it ensures that our voices are being heard. So we said to young people, come into this space. So we like creatives a lot. We like young people a lot. We call them unlikely networks, because these are people whom we normally...
networks?
Unlikely network. These are people whom we don't normally target in our civil society work. We probably target everyday Nigerian, but those artists which we think, these are creatives, this is a culture, this is Nigeria. Like I keep saying, if I'm going to communicate, there are languages which people understand. We have over 254 ethnic groups in Nigeria. Then you need to communicate to people in ways and words which they understand. So we had used that to see that, bring young people together in a space, train them on these issues, and give them that space. We know funding was challenging for them, so we had worked with Chocolate City. MI had given us that support back then, where we had organized this training for them for like 2-week training. Like traditional way we do it in civil society organization. When we tried it the first time, we brought people to the hotel and put you in a fantastic hotel in good rooms. Come down for training, these guys wouldn't come down. But you see, this is what I'm saying, that we need to understand how the approach is. So we said to them, we had to go hire a house that had about 10 rooms, put them in the house, come down for breakfast, we have discussions. Come back for lunch, we bring some Tony to talk to them. Come down for dinner, we have somebody from TV to talk to them. So you keep having those understanding. One of the things we found out during those trainings was one of the young artists mentioned he never knew his votes will count, so he wouldn't go out to vote. Another person was busy saying, the national budget, everybody has a right to demand accountability. They didn't know all of that. So this was an opportunity to get them excited about how to participate in governance processes, which takes me back to Cynthia as well. So there's the voting part of it, and this Cynthia gives us all their job. So once you finish voting, the next 4 years, we need to keep demanding accountability, right? So it's making your voice count in all of these processes, and decision processes ensure that young people's voices are being heard. So what we had done through that process after the training was work with music producing house. Like, it was MI back then, before he moved on. We spent another week with the producing houses. Like, everybody had a day scheduled for them to produce fantastic beats, to do your lyrics. So you had done all that lyrics through the process of training, but now you have to get into the studio to produce this. So after that point was, what do we have? So we have finished products, which we had young people talking about issues that basically concerns them. And this, for me, feels like having a voice to speak out to the public, to speak out to governments, and making sure your voices are being heard. For us at the lab, is about creating that platform for them to feel heard. I'm not sure there's any other thing for any young person in the society where you can't thrive or you can't progress. But your voice being heard is one of the things which we are now focusing on in terms of inclusion, to make sure people's voices are heard in governance processes. The next thing for us is also, how do we push those comments or those contents out basically to the radio houses or media houses, was now engaging, creating that broader engagement and partnership beyond just producing the song, to actually informing and inspiring change within the audience they operate in, and so on and so forth. But most exciting for us, we've seen young people in these spaces who have gone on to do greater things in their community in conducting town hall meetings. So these town hall meetings is like bringing artists at the grassroots level to say, let's talk about these issues that affect us in our own community. We see Nigeria as a big place, over 200 million. You can't basically reach them. So we are now doing that at the community level to ensure at town hall meetings, even in local languages, you can do that song. People will get to understand what you're saying, and you guys can also have that agreement between yourself on what the decision making will be for your community and how you engage government. So that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, okay. So one last question, and that can be your way of sharing your last thoughts before we then go to the audience. One of the reasons why, or one of the exciting things for me about this session was creating a space for someone like Nnamdi to be able to share thoughts with people like you that work in the civil society space. Do you think that we are constantly talking in echo chambers? So we have an art festival like this, you don't find any meaning there. And when we have those trainings that you talked about, how the fact that this is it's a society, it's our society, it is my society the same way it is yours. How can we leverage the different spaces and platforms and, where we do our work? How can we improve on, what we have now to, to advance civic participation, to have spaces that we can talk about democracy and, yeah.
Okay, so for, as you were just talking, I just remembered something. There's Omenana, it's a speculative fiction magazine. They had something they did with National Democracy Institute. They made a call and they asked writers, imagine what democracy would be in the future, right? So a lot of people sent in entries and it's an issue, right? It's a magazine, people subscribe, people read and all that. So you see, this kind of thing, it's a way creative people, creatives, writers and all that, can then represent their own ideas of what they're like, okay, this is what society should look like. Or since it's speculative, you can also go backward and say, oh, this is what society was like. So like a movie like The Woman King, yeah? Talking about yesterday and then talk about Woman King. So The Woman King like shows, okay, this was what a particular culture had done. This was how women had participated in like the ruling of, and also people look at that film and say, oh, war fight, they fight, no. There's something that happened. They were talking also about like traditional governance, how Naniska was then made the woman king. Do you understand? And in the beginning of the film, there's talk about, oh, the former king didn't do it. Do you get? So I just feel like if our spaces can then create avenues around theming these social issues, then creatives can always look at these themes and work towards, it.
Okay, so I do believe that we need to have that point of convergence. As we've seen, the fight for democracy is not a solo job. It's a joint venture that we all need to engage in, especially as Nigerians, as Africans, because I believe that Africa is today and Africa is the future. But the only way we can really claim the future is if we solve our issues within and set up systems of government that truly meets the needs of the people. And for me, when we think about the creatives and the work that we do, I see the creative space as the evolving center of power, because ordinarily we used to think of centers of power as those of us engaging in the streets or going for protests and all of that, or the traditional civil society. But one of the things we've learned from recent protests, so be it ENDSAS, or even when we did the Not Too Young to Run movement, so think of even the new types of movement in different parts of the world, is the fact that the creatives, the entertainment space is beginning to speak up and is beginning to take on those issues, and now we're seeing it reflected there. And I think that for me is the beginning, that we need to leverage our existing centers of power and we need to evolve together in demanding the kinds of system that we want. So for instance, one of the things we started to do, and we talked of most people don't know about Not Too Young to Run, and we decided to tell the stories of young people who contested and won elections in 2019, under 35-year-olds. And we have this book, Beating the Odds, where basically we say we don't want to do the usual CSO report. Normally, in our sector, very boring. We do report data. And we did a call for creative writers. And creative writers were assigned candidates that were selected in different parts of the country, gender and, gender balance. Sadly, I want to talk about the women part, because women inclusion and participation is still a major challenge. The way we talk around exclusion and generally, patriarchy is everywhere, right? So even when we did the under 35-year-olds who won elections in 2019, there were 101 under 35-year-olds, only 2 were women. So you can think that if you think about young people who won elections, there were just 2 women out of 101. So those 2 women, we told their stories, and beating the odds, it wasn't for sale. The first, and we had a group support us to produce 1,000 copies for free. Hopefully, we would want to go back. And I found it very interesting because that was when we had the meeting with the writers. It was just nice to listen to them, how they wanted to tell the story. They said, we want a story that readers would read, find it entertaining, but also inspired to participate. And at one point, as an organization, you want to push your ideas. And we said, no, let's not do the traditional thing of, this is how we want you to write. There's a reason we reached out to you as creative writers. So now, this is what we want to do. Can you run with it? Go tell the story, and we work on it together. But after that, we also learned that just 2 women. So what we had done, we're working on another one now, just telling the stories of the women who contested. We had to raise it to 45 years old to have more women who contested, some who won, those who lost. Put together their stories. And why am I bringing this into it? I feel that when we talked about books and how we have a lot of books around Africa or Nigeria written by foreigners. And it was also that idea that we are here, people come and interview candidates or people who have won elections. Most of them are white people. And we're not really telling our stories ourselves to even showcase how people are, use the term, beating the odds in the space where traditionally they are not expected to exist within. And so the idea for us was, can we start telling stories of young people, of women who are beating the odds every day, contesting. Though some are winning, some are not. We need the stories of those who won and those who didn't. And let's have this literature out there to inspire younger people who would read it, teenagers, and say, oh, if this young man, if this young woman can do this, then I would want to contest. The story of the young woman in Oyo, who she was pregnant when she was running. She was 31 at the time, or 30 at the time. And her story was just inspiring, being pregnant, being young, and then having to deal with people who wanted to be godfathers, and she didn't feel she needed to have a godfather. And just the challenges navigating the whole political space and doing it as a pregnant young woman was just really interesting. And I think of some of these stories, and in my mind, I'm like, I don't even know how many people here know that there's a book, Beating the Odds, that was written in 2019, 2020. To tell the story, or that there's a series, because we had the first one post 2015 elections, but we didn't have lots of young people then. But 2019 we had more young people. So if I'm thinking around how do we build power better, I think one, we need to tell our stories better, but stories of how we did new ideas coming into the space, people challenging the status quo every day. We need to properly document that, not just to provide knowledge, but to inspire younger generations to get involved in the space. That's one part. The second part is we need to amplify what people are doing, because most times people don't see the progress made. So people say votes don't count, but the truth is votes are beginning to count. And I would say this any day, anytime. We have a new electoral law. There were people who fought for this new law to be passed this year, which has made the system a bit more transparent. But we don't have people telling the story. So because no one is telling the story, people don't see the changes. So when we need that level of why we need to work together to build this new evolving center of power, is we also need the creatives to identify the progress made within the space and inspire hope in democracy, and showcase that results can be achieved. It may be slow-paced, but we do have progress being achieved within the system. So that for me is the other part. I think the third part is because, like I said, participation for me is art, is expression. We all need to get involved in the space. The policies that are made affect every space. So we could be here and there's a law that is passed and it just bans our freedom to write what we want to write. And what that does is you have to go out somewhere to write. You have censorship being snuck into different legislation to just limit our free speech or free expression, or saying, oh, this movie cannot be aired here, this movie cannot be showed here. So every day we have people in government who are looking for ways to shrink our voices and limit our opportunity to speak. And so for me, we need to be very involved, both as creatives and those working in the civic space, because at the end, if we sleep, if we just do our own thing in our own spaces, those in power would make laws and policies that would put us at a disadvantage, and at the end, we wouldn't even know when that happened. We would just end up crying. And I believe in being proactive than crying after the deed has been done.
Thank you, Cynthia.
So thank you very much, Cynthia. Just writing on what you have said as well on storytelling, I think that is huge impact. But for me, I'll also like to talk about the opportunities which lie there. I think this morning, after Tunji spoke, one of the gentlemen had already committed to not jack buying, which for me was quite interesting. Just yesterday, I met with Nnamdi and we had a long conversation on storytelling as well, on how we can begin to build those kind of collaboration and expand the space, which I think is very exciting and very, very important for us to see that it's a huge space, but how do we begin to leverage on the power of influence that resides in there? Just outside music, I'm wondering, like, what will it be if you see your billboard, one of the young people in this room, that if you see for paint artists, your work is on one of the billboards in central Lagos or central Abuja. So that, for me, is looking at how do we expand, begin to support young people in terms of building their capacity and also giving them that platform like we have done with Voice to Rep, to see that your inspiration, your creativity is out there in the public and impacting life or influencing people or inspiring change, which is, I think, is very, very important. Another thing for me is the power that resides in our voices. We need to begin to understand, have done is take money from politicians, influence the people, drive their decisions, basically. But he had committed after we had that training. It wasn't just influencing the young artists, but it was also that part for MI committing to this kind of things. So his voice for us meant a lot to inspiring young people. So if we can have those kind of platforms where we have A-list artists, I'm not sure what the word would be for the big artists here, the writers, how do we begin to influence or inspire change through our work? I think that would be very great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Any questions? Oh, okay. Yeah, I see 2 hands, 3. Okay. Yeah, please go for it.
Thank you so much, Cynthia and Friday, everybody on the panel, Tony. So you really did this foundation for the questions I will be asking, because you talked about how everybody in the society should be able to talk and complain when they are not okay with things. And some of the foundation for these conversations was the NSAS movement and how we were protesting against these powers. So another point of this conversation was inclusion, right? And I'm very interested in how you include voices that are not conventional in the society. I'm talking about LGBTQ people in works. Now we see LGBTQ artists who are creating work, they are writers. We see them in the Nigerian society. They are protesting against these injustices. During the NSAS, we had LGBTQ people protest. But I feel like when we have these conversations, right, they are very, very narrowed to just specifics like straight people, how is it beneficial for them, and those who are queer, who don't make conventional art. So in your work, as artists, writers, leaders in your different organizations, how do you include voices that are criminalized by laws and that are also not socially acceptable? Yeah.
Let's take all the questions. Yes, please.
Hello, Nnamdi. So my question is for you. So as a creative, do you feel social issues are really being put to the forefront as they should be, because social issues affect us all? And what are the best creative ways you think that social issues should be brought to the front?
There are 2 hands there. I think we can take... Let's take the 2 questions first, then we will take the last 2 questions so that we don't lose them.
There are 2 hands there, and there's a 3rd person here.
Oh, there's a 3rd person here? Okay.
Sorry, mine is going to be quick. So I just want to zoom in on the governance of the civic associations that you are leading or that you founded. because I'm also a chairperson of a civic association back in South Africa, where we fight corruption and maladministration by the government. And I always find that there is a clash between the board of trustees that I'm a chairperson of and the CEO in terms of the vision of the civic association. So how do you, as founders or CEOs of your respective civil associations, navigate that conflict between your vision, where you want the association to go, and what the board of trustees want? Because there's always that clash.
Okay, let's take those questions, then we'll take the last two. Let's go.
Or maybe I'll start with an interesting question. Because we started as students. We've evolved over 15 years ago. So, I mean, I was much younger. Now I'm much older. We've had two different boards, but the current board, one of the things I've learned is, one, as leaders, we need to be willing to be held accountable. When we demand that government listens, or government is accountable, government is responsive, it also means that as leaders in the space, we also need to be responsive, responsible. We need to listen and be accountable. And that has been helpful in working with the board, because our board is made up with by much older people. Most of us at the leadership level in my organization were in our mid-30s, early 30s. Just a few that just crossed to 36, 37. So we have much older board. But what we've learned is, in every conversation, we had to review even our vision. So our vision is a people-driven and democratic Africa. But we had a first vision, and then the board sat with us and said, no, this is what we think. At first, we're holding on to, like, we just brought you, you're just a board. Why would you want to impose? You're not the founder. You don't know how we started, you know? You don't know our struggles. You were not with us. But when we realized that this is what leadership is listening, is agreeing, is debating, and coming up with something that works for everyone. So for me, what I've learned is constant communication, always creating spaces to debate on issues, and that ability to listen. Because there's a reason you have people in your board, is to provide some level of direction and oversight and advisory. So if you're not willing to work within that, then you shouldn't claim you need a board. So that's one of the things we're learning to do, and listen a bit more and let our ego step back a bit. And, you know, just that whole founder thing, keep it aside to ensure you get the work done. The question my brother asked, very important question, and I think we're talking around inclusion and what have you. For me, democracy is freedom, right? Freedom to be who I am, to speak and act and to express myself the best way I want to express myself. And if you take away my freedom, you've taken away my life. And so when we think around democracy, and why I talk about the importance of participation is because if we can't include every voice in the conversation that we're having, then we can't say it's democracy, because all we're doing is shutting out a section of the society because maybe sometimes it's almost like, I don't think this is important issue, so let's talk about the hard, tough, important issue. But inclusion is as important as every other issue in the society. So one of the things our hypothesis is, if we get, which is why I talk about getting younger people in, if we get younger people and women into government, then we can get in people who are more progressive and who understand the issues better. I engage people in government, and sometimes I'm in a room just talking on women. We sent a letter for a legislation to increase women participation, and one of the House of Reps member called me. I signed the letter. We sent letters to all the senators and the House of Reps member, and he called me and said, young woman, who gave you the permission to write to me? Now, my partner is male, and he expected that it's the man that should be signing the letters. And he said, who gave you the permission to write? And he said, this women thing, what is it? You want to come and, why, and he was so angry, he called to scold me, literally, like he was my father. And I didn't understand that. So when we engage people in government, honestly, I always tell people my solution is to, let's get these guys out and get in more people, because as simple as women issues, or even as simple as just basic rights for everyone, they don't understand that. And whether we like it or not, let's leave them. If the more they are there, they perpetuate their ideas. So how we push for issues that have to do with inclusion generally, be it LGBTQ or whatever issue on inclusion, our approach is we look for opportunities to get in more progressive mind into offices, because those that exist now struggle to understand a lot of these issues, and they still look at issues from one lens, and we can't change them overnight. So the best way is get involved in the electoral process. Let's get in people that understand the realities of our present day. I'm so sorry. I spoke too long.
I'll quickly jump on that.
In 30 seconds.
Sure. I'll quickly jump to your question as well. So you have, at the lab, one of the key things we do is inclusion. So in decision-making processes, we ensure that voices like yours are heard. So if we're conducting a feedback session and all that we need to push back to government, we ensure your voices are heard. I'm not sure you've heard about the Open Government Partnership. Last year, the second National Action Plan actually provided for an inclusion and diversity thematic working group. But however, we were silent on those kind of issues because there's a law behind it, you know. So but those kind of opportunities for us is like, provide that platform to hear your voices and hear what you're thinking, then we push back to the government when we engage. Secondly, like Cynthia has also mentioned, for me, it's young people on the board issue as well. Is young people, we have really creative, exciting ideas. So when you jump out, you feel you know. You just keep doing all of that. But I tell you, the board has more experience. Every board has experience, in as much as they have, some people have their agenda, which you can't push away. The point is you have to find that space where you engage effectively on a quarterly basis as the law provides, and actually speak to them on these issues, and direction will be provided accordingly.
Thank you very much. There's a question for Nnamdi.
So you asked if social issues are given enough. Well, it's on us to do so. I can't really say if it is. When we read our works, we can find if it's there. But I don't think there's like, okay, this is okay. Like this is sufficient now. We just have to keep reiterating these issues, right? As they happen, we have to represent them in our work. Then about the best, so there's satire, right? Satire is like, there's non-fiction and there's fiction satire, right? So like, we used to have like satire books drop, like in the Nigerian publishing space. Satire books used to drop. For a time now, there's been a decline. I don't know why. But so one jury was talking yesterday about how she wanted to write a story, and then she was like, I have to make it fiction because I don't want to get in trouble and stuff. So satire can also help with that because like Violet Bungawayo does something very brilliant with Glory, where she writes like a story of her country and she fabulized it. So it's a fable, like just in the same spirit of Animal Farm, right? So I just feel those kind of ideas can be explored to make sure that social issues are represented in fiction.
Thank you very much. Our time is up. And I want to ask the organizers, can we take the last two questions? Please, very quickly.
Hi, everyone, once again. Thank you, panelists. So you mentioned, Cynthia, you mentioned we trying to get into more politics by voting the people that are supposed to be there, voting people that have the right to be there. But there's also this issue, I don't know how true it is, of the seat itself having power. Like the seat of the president having power. Okay, you can be someone that wants to change the country, someone that wants to, you know, basically do lots of things for the people, but there's that the seat has the power that will not maybe allow you to do that. How do we breach that thing? Because I think we're not touching that. I think that's a big issue that we're not touching. Thank you.
All right, three quick questions. One, Cynthia, how do we use the art to sustain interest between election cycle? Because I know a lot of times it's like during the build up to elections, more of those things, but between election cycles, what do we do? And to you, Friday, you've referenced Fela as an inspiration, but do you have any contemporary, artist that inspires, your work? And then to you, Namdi, don't worry, I forgot. Okay, now I remember, right? So the question to you, Namdi, is how do we use art to celebrate the progress that we've made, politically? We have the young, not too young to wrong act that's been passed. Now we have improvement in electoral laws. A lot of people will always feel like nothing is happening, but how do we use the arts to highlight the progress that we made within the political space? Thank you.
Should I? Okay. The seat having power. True, people, sometimes we have some success stories, young people who get in and they act right. We have people who have gone in and we can't even believe that we knew these people before they went into office. They tell you the system changed us and it's not our fault. You get in, the system just stops you from doing what you want to do. And one of the things we're beginning to learn, because every engagement, as we engage young people, we have some people we can celebrate. We have those we try not to even be seen in public with, just because they've just really embarrassed us, is to emphasize a lot more on value-based politics. Nigeria is not, every country has its own challenges, right? Same as leadership. But it takes the person who has the guts to stick to their values to actually do right. And how we can navigate this whole, the seat has power, is by getting in, is by, people that understand what values they represent, getting them into office. But the other thing is engaging. Now, democracy is not wishful thinking. It's a product or is an outcome of consistent engagement by a collective people, by a people. Meaning, once we elect, is what Ode said, once we elect you, we don't let you rest. We constantly engage. Most time after elections, we go back. And not connected to the question my brother asked, is that we get you into office. Let's say, for instance, after the elections, we don't stop there. We hold on to the manifesto you shared before you won the elections, and we engage you with that post the elections. That is the only way we can say we hold you to account, regardless of how your seat has power. That's one. The other for me is also about citizens understanding and appreciating their sense of agency. I think for a lot of us, even within Nigeria especially, we go to engage with young people. They don't think they have the power to hold people to account. Not just young people, different communities. They feel that the government is there and whatever they say is okay for us. We don't understand that leaders are there to serve us. I think maybe it's the experience of military dictatorship has somehow made us a bit more cowardly on how we engage government, because we've had this prolonged history of military dictatorship, and so we're still struggling to understand that now we have freedom to ask questions, and now we have freedom to protest and make demands. And then when we protest and we're attacked, we go back forgetting that the government power is not there to be pleased that you're challenging it. If you challenge it, it wants to fight back. What makes you powerful is that you fight back when it even fights against you. And so for us, as we work and engage, is that we continually engage the system, but start educating our fellow citizens to understand that it's a democracy, you have an agency, you have a voice. Ask questions. Government is to serve you. They are not doing you a favor by meeting your basic needs. That consciousness is what we need to get to, where we understand that this democracy, we have a right within it. And I think a lot of people, a lot of citizens who are yet to understand that, but I see progress. People are beginning to ask questions. Like I said, NSAS was inspirational because young people understood they had the voice and they had the power. We need to continually build upon that. So for me, after elections, consistent engagement. Legislature is an important arm of government. Our lawmakers in the Senate and the House, those are the people who hold the government in the executive to account. If we can't hold the lawmakers at the legislative where the laws are made, we can't hold them to act in their main duty of representation, lawmaking, and oversight, then we can't even truly realize the democracy we want to achieve. So consistent engagement post-election for me is the answer.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Okay, for your question, how we celebrate like successes, I think it's like the intention to represent it in your work and the spaces you find yourself, whether it's film, whether it's literature, whether it's music. And also, sometimes you don't, because there's very little like success, right? So you may also like remind people by inspiring them from what has happened before, what has happened, like successes that have happened in this space by our forebears and all that, right? Like this generation is very keen on saying we will not inherit the silences of our fathers, but many of them were not silent. Many of them changed the status quo, right? So if we are not having successes right now, we can always research, remind ourselves of those successes that have happened before and amplify that, and that would inspire success to happen now. That's what I think.
Thank you so much. Ode?
Okay, quickly, I'll touch a bit on the question for power. So post-election, like Cynthia mentioned on consistency, if you look at what has happened in fiscal transparency and other organizations, civil society organizations working on that, you have organizations working on budgeting, contracting, and auditing. There's a process of engagement across these platforms. If you look closely, corruption happens across all these places. Just yesterday, Dr. Joe posted something on the Auditor General who had they found about $90,900,000 in a public servant's, long story. But the point here is there are engagement processes like the Freedom of Information Act. You can demand information, you can actually demand accountability through those processes, which means you need to engage effectively across all board. To your question as well, I was just looking at, pardon me, I'm a local man, I'm like, what is contemporary music? But however, I also looked at what Files has done in the recent times. The album is called Moral Instruction. If you look at, what's the other guy, Burna Boy, he had the Twice as Tall album. So for me, those artists would be, but my only concern is, like M.I. mentioned yesterday, he talked about his album, I'm not sure the title again, Judah IP. He talked about, yeah, he said something about like being one of the lowest in all album he has released because he didn't get much attention. So for me, it's actually that business part of it. If you're not singing money, power, sex, and all of that, you don't make money. So most of them are not consistent as we want them to be or as they should be, basically. So if you look at Fela had done that consistently all his life. And that is like groundwork, which everybody's like, you can't fit in his shoes. So for me, those two artists have tried in recent times to do what we need to do. But yeah, we need to support more young artists to be in that line. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you so much for listening and for giving us 10 more minutes of your time. Thank you to the panelists, and this is where we call it a wrap.
Another round of applause for Toyi Nnamdi Friday. Which one's your first name? Ode. And of course, Cynthia, thank you so very much. What a fantastic way to round up the talks for today. The next item on the agenda is the concert. Are you excited about that? Oh, okay, good. Don't forget, we've got Queen Abeni Salawa, Primo,